South Africa's court application says Israel's acts are genocidal in character, intended to bring about the destruction of a substantial part of the Palestinian national, racial and ethnical group. Israel has rejected the claim, calling it blood libel. In a statement, it said, South Africa's claim lacks both a factual and a legal basis and constitutes despicable and contemptuous exploitation of the court.
Well, I think it's a superb document. It's 84 pages long. And what it has to do is it has to show that there was intent, genocidal intent, and it also has to show that there is significant slaughter and destruction taking place in Gaza that will lead to the death of a substantial portion of the Palestinian population in Gaza. And if you look carefully at the document, they provide an abundance of evidence of genocidal intent. It's really quite remarkable how Israeli leaders talk about the Palestinians and talk about what they intend to do to them. So I think the document has little trouble making the argument that there's genocidal intent. And if you look at what the Israelis have been doing since October 7th, from a military point of view in Gaza, it's an open and shut case. They are basically bent on destroying a substantial portion of the Palestinian population. They've killed huge numbers of Palestinians, huge numbers of women and children. They've been attacking hospitals. They've been attacking cultural sites. They've been destroying Palestinian houses. As you read the document, you can't help but thinking about how the Nazis talked about the Jews when you read about how the Israeli Jews are talking about the Palestinians. I mean, the parallels are marked. Right. And it's almost incomprehensible to me that Israeli Jews would be making these kinds of comments about any kind of people. But the evidence is overwhelming. The piece is heavily footnoted, and hardly anybody disputes that these comments were made. And then again, when you marry that with what's actually going on, it's horrific what's going on in Gaza. And therefore, the South African government concluded, and lays it out in this brief, that the Israelis are guilty of genocide.
So this international court is not a criminal court. It resolves disputes between countries. It could theoretically order the Israelis to do something or refrain from doing something. So the Israelis could thumb their noses at it if they wanted, or put them in trouble with the UN. But the court does not have an army to enforce its will. This is not an indictment of Prime Minister Netanyahu personally, the way President Putin has been indicted by the International Criminal Court. However, it is a court to which they are subject because it was established by the UN Charter, and Israel and South Africa are both members of the UN. Here's Admiral Kirby, cut number 2, Chris. I mean, his statement about this complaint is mind-boggling. It's hard to believe that this is the official United States position on this complaint.
South Africa's filed this 84-page lawsuit against Israel, accusing them of genocide. Israel says that this is blood libel. Does Washington agree? And where does this put Washington and Pretoria?
We find this submission meritless, counterproductive, and completely without any basis in fact whatsoever.
In another world, Professor.
Yeah, he's in another world. You really sort of wonder what the principal spokesman for the United States is doing when he makes comments like that. I mean, he can disagree with the report, of course,
right?
But this is an 84-page report that is thoroughly documented. You have much experience as a judge. If somebody brought this report before you, would you say that, you know, it's baseless? There are no facts to support the charge?
No, of course not. And the report is so well documented that the court has ordered some sort of oral argument or public deliberation about it next week. This is not a case where you need discovery, where you have to examine the facts. The facts are obvious and available for everybody to read. I would like to say a word about South Africa's false accusation that Israel is committing genocide. No, South Africa, it is not we who have to perpetuate genocide. It's Hamas. Hamas would kill us all if only it could. In contrast, the IDF is acting as morally as possible. It does everything to avoid harming civilians. And Hamas does everything to get them harmed, using them as a human shield. And I ask, where were you, South Africa, and others who accuse us? Where were you when millions were murdered and displaced from their homes in Syria, Yemen, and other places? You weren't there because everything you do now is just nonsense, lies, and evil spirit. We will continue our war of defense with just and moral. That's about as absurd as Admiral Kirby's comments.
Yeah, I mean, the argument that the Israelis are going to great lengths to spare civilian lives and they're just focusing on targeting Hamas is not a serious argument. Just the evidence belies it. If you look at the Genocide Convention, it spells it out very clearly that complicity is a crime.
Correct.
This is going to be a huge problem for him. It'll be a problem.
The Genocide Convention, which we wrote, the UN Charter, which we wrote, and Israel, of course, is a party to them. Do you have any idea why South Africa, of all places, not Paris, not Berlin, certainly not London, but why South Africa filed this complaint?
I think it has a lot to do with South Africa's history as an apartheid state. I think that South Africa has been very critical of Israel for a long period of time for being an apartheid state. I mean, this is a different issue than the genocide charge, but the South Africans have long thought that Israel is an apartheid state, and they have been very critical of Israel for that reason. But also because South Africa was an apartheid state and the international community took a long time to fix that problem. I think South Africans are very sensitive about issues like genocide and apartheid and instances where the so-called international community doesn't stand up and do anything. I think the South Africans are looking at what's happening around the world. Hardly anyone is saying anything critical of what Israel is doing, certainly in the West. And they just felt, this is my surmise, that somebody had to stand up and say something.